Welcome to channel, don't forget to subscribe. It began as a night of pure, unadulterated glamour, a shimmering testament to the economic boom of the early 1980s and the architectural prowess of Kansas City. Imagine the scene. It is July 17, 1981, and the lobby of the brand new Hyatt Regency hotel is filled with over 1,600 people. The air is thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the upbeat rhythm of a swing band. People are dressed in their finest attire for the tea dance, a weekly tradition that had quickly become the hottest ticket in town. Above the crowded floor, three massive, multi-ton walkways made of steel, glass and concrete are suspended from the ceiling like elegant ribbons of modern engineering. They are packed with spectators, people leaning over the railings to wave at friends below, their laughter blending with the music. Then, at exactly 7:05 p.m., the music is severed by a sound so violent, so unnatural, that survivors later described it as a literal explosion or a shotgun blast amplified 1,000 times. In an instant, the fourth-floor walkway, a 64,000-pound behemoth of structural steel, snaps. It doesn't just sag, it shears. It plunges downward, slamming into the second-floor walkway directly beneath it with the force of a falling skyscraper. Both structures, now a combined mass of nearly 130,000 pounds of pulverized concrete and twisted metal, scream through the air and vanish into a cloud of white dust as they flatten the lobby floor. There is a heartbeat of total, suffocating silence before the screaming starts. In the middle of this video, we are going to reveal a single, 3-minute decision made by a contractor on a busy afternoon that turned these walkways into a death trap. A mistake so deceptively simple that it is still taught in every engineering university on the planet as the ultimate warning of how a lack of communication can kill. The Hyatt Regency was not just another hotel, it was a $50 million crown jewel, a mega project intended to revitalize the urban core of Missouri. To put that into perspective, $50 million in 1981 would be roughly $170 million today, the equivalent of building a luxury stadium or a high-tech hospital wing. At the center of this ambition was the atrium, a vast, sun-drenched cathedral of glass that rose 40 stories into the sky. This wasn't just a room, it was a statement of human dominance over space. The atrium was wide enough to fit several Boeing 747s parked wing to wing, a cavernous void that demanded a unique solution for guest movement. The architects designed a series of 3 skywalks, the second, third and fourth floor walkways. These were 120-foot-long spans of architectural brilliance floating in mid-air. To give you a sense of the scale, each walkway was as long as 3 city buses parked end-to-end and weighed as much as 25 full-sized SUVs. They were suspended from the ceiling by a series of 1.25-inch diameter steel hanger rods. To the naked eye, these rods looked like thin threads, creating an illusion of weightlessness that was the talk of the architectural world. It looked impossible, yet it was certified by the most prestigious firms in the country. Every single bolt, every weld and every structural plate had been inspected. This was a project by Gilson & Associates, a firm known for its rigorous standards and technical precision. The blueprints had been reviewed, the city inspectors had signed off on the safety protocols, and the construction had followed the letter of the law. It was legal, it was modern, and it was supposedly over-engineered. The load-bearing structures were designed to handle not just the dead weight of the concrete, but a massive live load of pedestrians. Engineers had calculated the safety factor to be well within the margins of international building codes. There was no reason to doubt the integrity of the Hyatt. It was the safest place in the city. Until the very laws of physics were challenged by a design flaw hidden in plain sight. We aren't talking about a natural disaster or a terrorist attack. We are talking about a failure of basic geometry that occurred while everyone was looking at the beautiful pink marble and the soaring glass ceilings. The assumption was that if it looks strong and the experts say it's strong, it must be safe. But on this night, the yield strength of those steel rods was being pushed to a breaking point that no one had actually calculated for the final build. The most terrifying part of this story isn't that the building was weak, it's that it was built exactly how the revised plans said it should be, and those plans were a death sentence signed in ink. Before the dust even settled in that lobby, the question wasn't just how did it fall, but how did we let this happen? To understand why 114 people had to die, we have to look past the velvet curtains and the jazz music, deep into the skeletal structure of the hotel. The catastrophe of the Hyatt Regency was not born on a Friday night in July. It was born in a series of frantic phone calls and skipped calculations 2 years earlier. At the heart of this failure is a concept engineers call the load path, the specific route that the weight of a structure takes as it travels down to the ground. In a perfect world, this path is a straight, unbreakable line, but at the Hyatt, that path was twisted into a deadly knot. The original blueprints, drafted by the esteemed firm Jack D. Gillam and Associates, called for a series of continuous 45-foot-long steel hanger rods. These rods were supposed to run from the heavy structural steel in the ceiling straight through the 4th floor walkway and continue all the way down to support the 2nd floor walkway. In this original configuration, each walkway was independent. The nuts supporting the 4th floor only had to carry the weight of the 4th floor. The nuts supporting the 2nd floor only carried the 2nd floor. It was simple, elegant, and theoretically sound. However, theory often crashes into the reality of the construction site. The steel fabricator, Haven Steel Company, looked at those 45-foot rods and saw a logistical nightmare. To install them, they would have to thread the entire length of the rod, a process that is not only time-consuming but risks damaging the integrity of the steel. In a fateful, 3-minute decision that was never properly documented or calculated, the design was changed. Instead of one long rod, they decided to use 2 sets of shorter rods. The first set connected the ceiling to the 4th floor walkway. The second set connected the 4th floor walkway to the 2nd floor walkway. To the untrained eye, it looked identical, but in the world of physics, this change was cataclysmic. By shifting to a double rod system, the engineers unknowingly doubled the load on the connection points of the 4th floor walkway. Now, the nuts and the steel box beams of the 4th floor weren't just holding up their own level, they were acting as a bridge for the entire weight of the 2nd floor hanging below them. Think of it like this. Imagine 2 people hanging from a rope attached to a ceiling. In the original design, both people are holding onto the rope itself. The rope feels the weight of both, but each person's grip only has to support their own body weight. In the revised Hyatt design, the top person is holding the rope, but the second person is hanging onto the first person's ankles. Now the top person's grip, the connection at the 4th floor, must support the weight of both people. The load capacity of the connection was stretched to its absolute limit before a single person even stepped onto the glass. The yield strength of the steel, the point at which metal stops acting like a solid and starts behaving like plastic, deforming permanently, was being challenged by the very air it occupied. The technical term for what happened next is shear failure. The box beams supporting the walkways were made by welding 2 C-shaped steel channels together. The hanger rods passed through the middle of these beams. Because of the design change, the nut and washer on the 4th floor were being pulled through the bottom of the steel beam with twice the force they were designed for. The most haunting part is that there were warning signs. During the construction in 1979, a large section of the atrium roof actually collapsed. This should have been a black box moment, a signal to stop and reevaluate every structural calculation in the building. The engineers at Gillam & Associates claimed they did exactly that. They assured the owners that they had reviewed the entire structure, including the walkways. But the math for the double rod change was never actually done. They looked at the sketches, assumed the wind load and seismic load margins were sufficient, and moved on. They ignored the angle of inclination and the sheer torsional stress that the weight of a crowd would eventually apply. There was no safety factor left. In engineering, you typically want a safety factor of at least 2 or 3, meaning the structure can hold 2 to 3 times its expected maximum load. At the Hyatt, because of that one change, the safety factor had dropped to approximately 0.6. The walkways were failing the moment they were finished. They were simply waiting for the right vibration to trigger the end. They were not just a walkway, they were a 130,000-pound guillotine held up by a prayer and a lack of oversight. As the tea dance began and hundreds of people began to sway in rhythm with the band, they were unknowingly performing a harmonic resonance test on a structure that was already in a state of terminal fatigue. The physics were set, the decisions were final. The point of no return had been passed long before the first bolt snapped. The clock on the wall of the Hyatt Regency lobby froze at 7:05 p.m. For those standing on the second-floor walkway, the first sign of the end wasn't a visual cue, but a sensation, a sudden, sickening drop as if the very air had lost its buoyancy. Eyewitnesses described a sound that mimicked a massive explosion, followed by the high-pitched pinging of steel bolts snapping like glass beads. In a span of just 7 seconds, the fourth-floor walkway split at its central connection points. The steel box beams didn't just bend, they unraveled. The nuts holding the rods literally punched through the bottom of the beams, creating jagged holes in the metal. As the fourth-floor span began its vertical descent, it acted like a massive piston, slamming into the second-floor walkway directly beneath it. The momentum was unstoppable. Approximately 65 tons of concrete, steel, and human beings accelerated toward the lobby floor. The impact was so violent it registered on local seismographs. A thick, choking cloud of pulverized concrete dust instantly blinded everyone in the atrium, turning the bright, festive tea dance into a dark, suffocating hellscape. When the dust began to settle, the scene was unrecognizable. Where there had been a soaring architectural marvel, there was now a jagged pile of rubble 20 feet high. The rupture of the hotel's main water lines added a terrifying new dimension to the catastrophe. Millions of gallons of water began to flood the lobby, threatening to drown the survivors who were pinned beneath the massive concrete slabs. Rescuers arrived to find a scene described by many as a war zone. Firefighters and ordinary citizens used car jacks, sledgehammers, and even their bare hands to claw at the debris. One of the most haunting stories is that of Mark Williams, a young man who spent hours trapped in the freezing water, holding the hand of a stranger who eventually went cold. Or the story of the band who were playing the final notes of a swing classic when the sky fell on them. The human cost was staggering. 114 people were killed instantly or died of their injuries, and 216 others were left with life-altering scars, both physical and psychological. This was not just a list of statistics, these were families, local leaders and children who had come for a night of joy and found themselves in the middle of the deadliest structural collapse in United States history until the fall of the Twin Towers. The immediate response from authorities was a mix of shock and clinical precision. Within hours, the National Bureau of Standards (NBS) had cordoned off the site. They didn't just want to clean up, they wanted to find the black box of this building. Lead investigator Edward Frank began the painstaking process of analyzing the wreckage. The investigators discovered something chilling. The walkways were so poorly designed that they were barely supporting their own weight. The data logs showed that on the night of the collapse, the walkways were carrying only about 10% of the maximum live load they were supposed to handle. This meant the failure wasn't caused by the crowd being too heavy or people dancing too hard. It was a failure that was destined to happen eventually, even if the building was empty. The critical decision-making process was laid bare. It was discovered that the structural engineer, Jack Gillum, and his project manager, Daniel Duncan, had approved the fatal double-rod design change over the phone without ever performing a single calculation to check the new stresses on the fourth-floor beams. The investigation turned into a legal and professional firestorm. During the hearings, it was revealed that the change from a single rod to a double rod system had doubled the load on the U-brackets. The technical term is fundamental design error, but the reality was much grimmer. It was professional negligence. In 1985, the Missouri Board of Architects, professional engineers and land surveyors took the unprecedented step of convicting Gillum and Duncan of gross negligence, incompetence and misconduct. Both men lost their engineering licenses in multiple states. While no one served jail time, the professional fallout was total. The engineering firm went bankrupt under the weight of $140 million in legal settlements, the equivalent of nearly $500 million today. The Hyatt Regency collapse became a permanent scar on the face of American engineering, a case study in how the chain of command can fail when everyone assumes someone else is doing the math. The investigation concluded that the catastrophe was 100% preventable, a fact that only deepened the tragedy for the families who were left to pick up the pieces of their broken lives, while the industry began a radical, soul-searching transformation. The shockwaves of Kansas City didn't stop at the hotel doors. They ripped through the very foundation of the engineering profession, triggering a total overhaul of the standard of care. Before July 17, 1981, the world of construction operated in a dangerous gray area of responsibility shifting. Architects assumed the engineers had checked every bolt, engineers assumed the fabricators understood the structural intent, and fabricators assumed the shop drawings were bulletproof simply because they hadn't been rejected. The Hyatt collapse shattered this illusion of shared safety. In the immediate aftermath, the American Society of Civil Engineers, ASCE, took a revolutionary and controversial stance. The Structural Engineer of Record, SER, now bears the absolute, non-delegable responsibility for the structural integrity of every single component in a building. This means that even if a contractor suggests a minor change to a hanger rod or a weld on a busy Tuesday afternoon, the lead engineer must personally verify the math and sign off on it with their professional license on the line. To put this in perspective, this change moved the weight of responsibility from a diffuse cloud of everybody to a single point of one person. It is the difference between a team playing a sport without a captain and a ship where the captain is legally required to go down with the vessel if it sinks. The financial echo of the tragedy was just as deafening as the collapse itself. The $140 million in legal settlements, which would be nearly $500 million in today's currency, sent a chilling message to every firm in the industry. Negligence is infinitely more expensive than perfection. Imagine the cost of building 10 state-of-the-art high schools or purchasing a fleet of 20 private luxury jets. That is the price tag of a single uncalculated design change. Insurance premiums for engineering firms skyrocketed by as much as 300% overnight. This wasn't just a tax, it was a safety premium that forced every major firm to implement a 2-tier or 3-tier review process. Today, a design like the Hyatt Skywalks would be subjected to peer review laws, requiring a second, completely independent firm to audit the plans before a single ounce of concrete is poured. It is like having two different pilots check the fuel levels of a plane independently. The chance of both missing a critical error is statistically near zero. But why did it take 114 lives to learn a lesson that seems so fundamental? If we look at the Swiss cheese model of accidents, we see that the Hyatt collapse was the result of multiple layers of failure lining up perfectly. The first hole was the initial design's difficulty to build. The second was the fabricator's suggested change. The third was the lack of a formal calculation for that change. And the final hole was the failure to notice the actual deformation of the beams during the hotel's first year of operation. In history, the Hyatt is the modern successor to the Quebec Bridge collapse of 1907 and the Tay Bridge disaster of 1879. In every instance, the yield strength and load capacity of the materials were sacrificed at the altar of the schedule or the ego. The Hyatt is now a mandatory Day 1 case study for every engineering student in the United States. They don't just study the sheer failure of the steel, they study the ethics of the phone call where the change was approved. They are taught that behind every decimal point in a calculation sits a human being whose life depends on that math being right. The hotel still stands today, now known as the Sheraton Kansas City Hotel at Crown Center, but it is a ghost of its former architectural ambition. The atrium was completely remodeled and the floating skywalks were never rebuilt. Instead, the remaining walkways are supported by massive grounded columns, a visual admission of defeat and a permanent reminder that, in this instance, our desire for beauty outpaced our commitment to safety. It took 34 years for a memorial to be built, a quiet circle of stone and stainless steel that finally gave the families a place to mourn. It serves as a reminder that the T-Dance tragedy wasn't an accident in the way we usually use the word. It was a failure of communication, a failure of oversight, and a failure of the sacred contract between the builder and the public. When you walk through a modern airport, a stadium, or a shopping mall, you are placing your life in the hands of a stranger's calculations. The Hyatt Regency collapse ensured that those hands are now held to the highest standard of accountability in human history. If you found this deep dive into the mechanics of this disaster insightful, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We dedicated hundreds of hours to researching the technical specifics of these cases to ensure the lessons of the past are never forgotten. Now I want to hear from you in the comments. In an era where we are building faster and cheaper than ever before, do you think we have truly learned our lesson? Or are we just waiting for the next minor change to trigger another catastrophe? Let's discuss below. See you in the next video.